Okay, let's go ahead and get started today. Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for dialing in. We appreciate you taking time to be with us on behalf of the entire Realizeit team. We have a great presentation today. We have Annie Schultz from Herzing University with us, and she is going to talk about her personal journey in transitioning from a traditional teaching situation to an adaptive teaching situation. She has a lot of knowledge to share, and I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to say. A couple of notes. We will be taking questions throughout the webinar. Please submit them through either the question and answer feature or the chat feature over on the side. If you are dialed in as a participant, your line's on mute, so please feel free to communicate with us through those two features during the entire webinar. If the question is relevant to what she's addressing at the moment, I may chime in and ask a question during the webinar. Otherwise, we'll address all of your questions at the end. She's happy to stay on as long as we need. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Annie. Take it away.
All right, so hi everyone. My name is Annie Schultz, and I'm the Director of Instructional Support at Herzing University. I want to give a little bit of background on what we've done as a university before I get started. So we started this process last year with our college algebra course, and I was a math instructor at that point, and I was asked to be the subject matter expert for the college algebra transition. From there, I became involved with working with other subject matter experts. We now have a professional development course, a psychology course. We're working on composition. So I've been the subject matter expert. I've been the instructor of the course. I taught that first algebra course. I've helped with the design. I've helped build. And now my focus is training faculty to teach in the adaptive platform and adaptively in their classroom. So today's presentation is really going to be me talking about what's worked, what hasn't, and our journey. We're still very new in this. As I said, we launched our first course last year, and now we have 3 courses running, and we're building 2 more right now. So new in the process, but have a lot of story to tell, so just a little background there. The first thing I wanted to share with the group is our definitions of adaptive learning and the adaptive teaching model. If you go online and you type these in, they have so many different definitions out there, and so these aren't necessarily what everybody is using, but this is what I've come to use and have shared with our faculty. But basically that adaptive learning is using an interactive technology to deliver content and then is adapting to the student as they engage with the content. Now the focus more of this conversation is the transition to the adaptive teaching model. And so adaptive teaching is the phrase that I like to use, and basically it's taking that data that we get from the adaptive learning system and then becoming a facilitator of learning for our students and using a balance of the data, because it's very easy to get death by data and become overwhelmed. So finding what is the data you want to use in your classroom and that balance to offer a more effective and personalized session to the students, whether it be in the online or in a face-to-face classroom. So again, those are our kind of definitions, and I like to speak to adaptive teaching versus adaptive learning alone, since it is both that we need to be successful. So this presentation, I say there are 3 key things, and the first thing that I want to speak to is understanding the student interface. So the first day when you go into a class as an instructor, if you haven't experienced the interface as a student, it's going to be very challenging to answer questions. So why is the system doing this? You know, this option appeared. What does that mean? And as much as you train from the instructor interface, until you've gone in and actually played around with the system and clicked through it, it's very hard to really have a good understanding of what happens. So when we first launched this math class, I had a couple of faculty go in and I said, okay, so I've enrolled you as a student. I'd like you to start from the student perspective. Start with the determined knowledge, which is the question set that appears at the beginning of the learning map to measure previous knowledge, basically. And then engage with an entire unit. And for us, that's a week's worth of content. Well, what I found was they got all the answers right. Of course, math faculty teaching college algebra, they know their topic. And so they took the determined knowledge, answered all the questions right, and then they worked through the map and they got all the questions correct. Well, then they got into class, and students started asking, well, what does this mean? And why is this saying I should go back to a previous topic? And basically we realized that the faculty didn't actually train in the student interface because they didn't engage as the student would. They didn't get anything wrong. And the whole idea of the adaptive learning platform is it personalizes to the students. And yes, there are some that are going to go through and get them all right, but more often than not, students are going to miss questions, and the system is going to make suggestions on other places to go or offer content in a different way. And so the biggest encouragement I have is have your faculty engage with it as a student. And when they're engaging with it, don't have them get them all right. And it was funny because when I asked the faculty, I said, did you go in and purposefully miss any of the questions? Well, no, of course not, because we didn't want to look bad. And I kind of laughed. And so going forward, anytime I have faculty go in there, I mention, we're not grading you as faculty. We really want you to engage with the student. Go in and get them all wrong and see what happens. Go in and get some wrong. Do them all right and then go back and get them wrong. So really try to play with the system, break the system, do everything you can that you think a student might do. So in the classroom, when those questions come up, you've done it. You know what's going to happen, and you're able to say, yes, this is why this happened. This is what this is doing. And no matter the training that you've experienced from the outside, that hands-on and getting in there from a student perspective is key. So what we do now for our faculty going forward is to be eligible to teach in our adaptive courses, they're actually enrolled as a student in a course copy. We use integration through Blackboard. So I have a faculty section that I enroll the faculty in, and I say they need to complete an entire learning map. And I don't want to see that it's 100% mastery. I want to see that they've stumbled and had some some trouble in areas to really see how that system works. And so that's part of our onboarding and training to be a teacher with our adaptive platform. And so again, very key, understanding that student interface. So the next key to this transition is letting the data drive the classroom plan. So one of the great things about the adaptive learning platform is it offers information to the student at the most granular level of content. So what you see on my slide here is one learning map or 1 week's worth of content, for example. And those bars that you see in the bar graph are showing the amount of topics that the student has worked on, their mastery level, and the green line shows you how much time they've spent engaging. So those are really important as you're planning your class because you know where your students are at. You can see their progress. And off to the side here, I'm showing another analytic piece, but this specifies needing intervention. So there are 5 students that the system is saying they're really struggling with these topics, and it will list their names and tell me as the instructor that that's the issue that they're having. There are 11 specific problems. So it may be the same student, but they're having trouble in an area. And I can see that 4 students are excelling at this topic. And those are students that I might want to pull off to the side and offer more challenging content or challenge them with something. And just some other things that we can see here. So the key to this, with letting the data drive the classroom plan, is if you know in Unit 1, you need to cover Chapter 1. You no longer go in saying, I'm going to cover all of Chapter 1 today. You're going to visit the instructor interface and say, okay, so my students need to see this topic as a whole. And then maybe think about some smaller groups. So this group of students is struggling here, so do a mini lesson with those while the others are working on something else. So instead of standing in front of the class and talking to the students about Chapter 1, now you're giving very targeted information regarding that chapter and those topics that you know that the students need. So this is a big transition for our faculty. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide here. So this is the learning map. And knowing where your students are at in the learning map is another important part of the classroom. Now, I will tell you this is definitely a challenge. So in this classroom here, for example, you'll see that there are 26 students. And 26 students have done great on the first 2 topics. Then we have a large drop-off. And if you see the independent research, 15 students are doing well, but there are 11 students. I'm sorry, there's the students haven't even started it. So that 15 out of 26, you can see that the rest of the students haven't started, and it is 11. My apologies on that. So now what the instructor is tasked with is, how do I use this information to make my classroom time the most effective? So when I'm talking with faculty, when you have 26 students in a classroom, you can't necessarily have that one-on-one time with each of your students. But what you can do is group. You can look for students that are strong and doing really well and asking them to teach their students. You can group students by strong, middle, weak in groups and have them do discussions. And so this data doesn't need to be your entire plan, but you want to use this information as you create your classroom plan. Another piece of information that I really like and promote in math especially, but we're using this in the other classes, is the system will tell you the frequently missed questions. So as your students progress through the topics, they're offered a set of questions. So in class, oftentimes what I'll do is I will take a look at these question sets, and I will ask the faculty and students to discuss them. So here was a question that many of them missed. So that might be my classroom start. All right, I'm going to put this question up there and discuss in groups. How do you answer this question? And even to the extent of, why do you think a student might have gotten it wrong? What could misconceptions be? In a math class, it's maybe those are the questions that you want to throw up on the board and work with the students on. So I really like the frequently missed question piece, because it is actually questions that the student has seen, whether it's a version of it or not. And it's another way to really help you as the instructor to see what the students know, how they're answering the questions, but not only whether they got it correct, but looking at what the incorrect answers they chose were, because that can lead to a really interesting discussion about why someone chose the opposite question or the answer that was incorrect. So the other thing I want to mention about letting the data drive the classroom plan is I have faculty, and I'll tell you, are completely overwhelmed at first by the data. So when we're transitioning from the traditional model, and here at Herzing we have both online and face-to-face, but when we do this transition, it isn't an all or nothing. I meet individually with the faculty, and we have a conversation about how can you integrate some of this into your current practice. So instead of black to white, there's a gray area of transition. So right now, let's say it's a lecture-driven class. Well, how can you break your lecture up? How can you add some more engaging pieces in? How can you incorporate using this data into your classroom? So I don't come to faculty and say, here is all this data, and now I want your entire class to focus around this data. There's got to be this transition, and I will tell you, I'm a math person, so I love data. But now that I'm working with our psychology faculty and our English faculty, they see this data and are overwhelmed. And so another really important piece is when I sit down with faculty and talk to them about this data, is I point out the key pieces. So I mentioned here the frequently asked questions. Start there. You can definitely do an overview, see how your students are doing, and pick out students that are struggling. And you want to note that. But in the classroom, maybe this is that first time you teach, you're going to transition, you're going to focus on incorporating and having these discussions with the frequently asked questions. And then the next time you teach it, you're going to be more comfortable with the data, and now you can drive some lessons around small grouping and things. And some faculty are much more comfortable and have more of a facilitated classroom where others don't. And so I think it's very important as a faculty member to realize where your comfort level is and adjust. And give time, because again, that flipping a switch is very hard to do. And this is a change that we're doing as our institution. So we do have some time to integrate these practices in and make sure that faculty are very comfortable. The other story I'll mention is with our faculty, when they're not comfortable, and if a student asks a question or they're looking at the data and they don't know what it means, they get frustrated. And the students are then frustrated because they see that from the faculty. And so it's really our mission to make sure that faculty are comfortable, faculty understand, and this is a tool they use in their classroom to support what they've been doing. So the other thing, as I mentioned here, is again, and I talked about this, but you want to address the learning of the current students, engaging activities, topic discussions, thinking about mini sessions in a class. In an online environment, a couple of suggestions that I have is if you're looking at the learning map and you see a few students are struggling on these topics, or 6 or 7 students are struggling, you can create a discussion board where you add some resources, throw in a couple of questions, and invite those students to engage in that discussion board. Create some supporting videos. You could, during your office hours for an online environment, for example, offer to do a mini session where you're going to talk about those materials and then discuss outside of your session to see, again, encouraging students to work with you. So again, you know where they're at, and so you can offer the specific information for those topics that they need. The other thing I mentioned is I really like the idea of open-ended questions to encourage discussion and engagement. So one of the trainings that I actually offer to my faculty are how to write good open-ended questions, whether it be for a discussion board or an assignment where they're writing, or it's just preparing for class. So starting out with an open-ended question, and that can be along the lines of or support those frequently missed questions, or it can just be a nice way to introduce the class and bring them in. But those open-ended questions lead to a nice discussion and are relatively easy and don't take a lot of time to create in your classroom preparation. So the last key piece that I mentioned here is personalized and targeted student interventions. And so this really does go along with using the data, but it's even more than that. So I mentioned this a little bit before, but we really want our faculty to become a facilitator of learning instead of a disseminator of information. So here at Herzing, we're a career-focused school, and the application of the learning is huge, and that's important for many of us. But many of our faculty went to universities where it was a big lecture, and they read hundreds and hundreds of pages to prepare for class and then came into a lecture. And there's a lot of studies that show that that isn't the most effective way for students to learn. And so what we're asking our faculty to do is to transition from someone who is speaking to the faculty, though there are absolutely portions of our classes where there is information being offered to the students. But after that, you want to have discussions, you want to engage with the students, you want to offer, again, that targeted information. So the classroom portion can be driven by the data. It can also be driven by your students. So one of my faculty this year really targeted, so they had a class full of soccer fans. It was a math class. So they made some engaging activities regarding soccer. And they included, this is algebra, but they used algebra for soccer. And the students really enjoyed that, and it just happened to be that set. So with these information pieces and with this personalized learning with your students, you're able to interest them and connect them. So real-world applications, future value of these courses. So the other two pieces of this that are really, really important are remediation and enrichment. So as I mentioned here at Herzing, we have both online and on-ground classes, and we use the same adaptive learning system for each course. So college algebra uses the same course online versus on ground. But the faculty are trained a little bit differently because it does depend on how you're teaching. So offering remediation, for example, we always want to start by what they're doing well. So in a ground classroom setting, if your students are working and you've seen that they're struggling, you might want to pull them off and have a quick check-in with them. But offer what they're doing well. Point out what is going well, what have they done that's really important so that you're not just telling them some things to improve, but then you want to talk about what can be improved. It's really important to follow up as well. So when you're working with the students, and again in class, it might be pulling them off to the side for a minute, or if they're working at their computer, just a quick check-in. But you want to help work out a plan for how they're going to improve. So if they've fallen behind, what can they do? Do you have a tutoring center? Can you invite them to your office hours? Do you have other resources? Is it not school related? Are they falling behind because other things are going on in their life? Is it outside of kind of academia? Can we offer that support there? Online, sending out weekly updates. So we really recommend and have seen great success in sending a very quick update to each of our students. It states their grade, what they're doing well, how they can improve, and then an invitation to meet with the instructor to talk about the plan. And this is for both good and or struggling and strong students. But again, it's this for the struggling students specifically. It is the targeted interventions to them. The other really important thing is instead of approaching a student and saying, hey, I noticed that you were struggling on Unit 1, what you can say is, I noticed you were struggling on this topic. And you can offer very targeted information to that specific topic and offer remediation to them. The third note there I have again for remediation is for an online student, you want to reach out throughout the week, any sign of an issue. So in our traditional model, we had basically the feedback came at the end of the week. The students would work and then they would submit a quiz or complete their homework. But with this, if you see that a student hasn't engaged with the system in the third day of class, you can send out an email. Hey, how's it going? I just wanted to check in, see how everything is going. And if you see students are really, really excelling, you can do the same thing. So the other piece I mentioned is enrichment. So, and I'm guilty of this myself, it's very easy to realize that students are struggling and to spend your time working with them. But we have found that if you see that your students are doing well, just that quick, hey, good job, I see you're doing great on Unit 1, or in an online environment, sending out that email saying you're doing great and listing a few things and areas for improvement, and you click, you say nothing. That has helped, and we've gotten some very positive feedback from our students that the good students like to see that. The other thing about enrichment I think is important is in our course design, we set it to meet our course objectives. But you oftentimes will have a student who is really excelling. And those excelling students, we want to keep them engaged. We want to keep them interested. We want them to come to class and walk away gaining something. So a couple of suggestions I have for those enrichment students, one thing that we have seen work is ask them to teach. So say, so-and-so you really understand this topic. Would you present to present this question to this group? So those frequently missed questions, maybe you have mini groups and you ask them to present. You can also then ask, the students that are struggling to present a question as well. But having them help as the teacher oftentimes is a nice way, and many students like that, not all. The other thing you can do for the enrichment ideas in in-class, if you know that they're getting the topic, maybe have them answer some questions that are more challenging, or ask them something beyond. In an online environment, in the discussion, respond to them with a follow-up question that steps it up a level. So again, you're recognizing that they're understanding a specific topic and they're really getting it. And you're able to target that to them. So again, recognize and challenge those students that are excelling. So the really, really nice thing, and the thing I really walk away from with the system that I like, is the personalized and targeted student interventions can happen every day. Because when I log into the system, I can see where the students are at, I can see who's struggling, I can see how much time students have spent. And so every time I speak to a student, I'm informed on where they're at academically, and that leads the conversation to support them, whether it be needing extra help with academics, whether there's other things going on. But it helps me be aware. The other nice thing is the student is also aware, because all the information that I can see on my end, the students also have. So as they're working through this, they also see the colorations on the learning maps. They can see, the system is offering a remediation by going back. And so you work together with the system to really personalize and work with your individual students. I know I'm a few minutes early, but that's what I have, so.
Thanks, Annie. I will start giving you some questions. Just a reminder to everyone still on the line, if you do have questions, feel free to type them in either the chat area or the Q&A area, and we will go ahead and address all of those. But to start, first question is, it looks like there are a lot of advantages you're experiencing through using adaptive. Thinking back to the beginning, what made you choose adaptive in the first place in this format?
So I've been an in-ground or face-to-face instructor for a long time and recently transitioned to online. And one of the things that I really struggled with online was the way that we did math homework. So at institutions that I've been at, we had students write out homework on a piece of paper and scan it in. I had other institutions where we required the students to type out all of the work step by step in a Word document. And most recently, we were engaging with some external kind of platforms, but again, it was so much work on the student's end. And for me as a math instructor, it's really important to see the step-by-step, and it's important for me to see where the students are coming from. And so we started by looking for a solution really for math. And as I engaged with it from math, I realized how beneficial it would be for other areas as well. I like the granular learning. That's something that I think is really important. Instead of covering Unit 1, the students cover a specific topic. The other reason that I was really drawn to this, especially for the population that we have here at Herzing with jobs and family, and I know many of us have the same thing, is the chunking model, or we talk about those learning map topics. I love that a student can sit down for 20 minutes, work on a topic, and have completed something, and get recognition in the system that they've worked on something, can close the system and can come back. And so they can do 20 minutes at a time versus sitting down and doing a 3-hour span, though that works as well. And so I feel like it's very inviting for those few reasons. Now, I know I speak quite a bit to the online, but the other thing I like about it from the ground perspective is that the students are able to do some of the work outside of class. So we don't use exactly a flipped model, but I like knowing where my students are at when they come to class so that I can target how I teach. I no longer have those glazed faces looking at me after I've presented something, and I don't know if I've bored them, if I've confused them, if they're thinking about lunch. So it really gives me that idea of once I've talked to them, I already know kind of who is struggling, who got it, and I really can use that in my presentation to the students. So those are kind of the things that have drawn me to this and had me continue using it outside of the math courses.
Great, and that's a wonderful segue into our next question. Approximately how much time do students and teachers spend in the classroom versus online in this model?
So it really depends on how you design it. So a few examples. In our math class, a lot of what is happening in the system. And so for the college algebra class, we have the students work in the system at home, and I have it set up so we have 8 weeks. The system is designed to require about 10 to 11 hours for the college algebra course of engagement. So our math teachers are actually in classroom settings, and so they're having their students engage with the system in class as well as at home, but still having engaging pieces. Our psychology course, that is set up so that the students have basically reading and they're engaging with the learning materials at home, so it's the homework setup. And then the in-class time is still the lecture portion or the discussion portion where they're not necessarily using the system in class. So it's how you design it. And you can have it, this portion of it be, you know, a few hours. You can have it be the majority of your class. I guess the biggest answer I have is it's what works for the content and the course that you are offering. We use this as a tool in conjunction with, you know, the other things. Our entire course isn't housed within the system here at Herzing.
Got it. And when you are putting together a class, designing coursework in this particular system, does it take longer to design the course, and if so, approximately how much longer?
So honestly, the course design itself, I would say, is consistent for us with a traditional non-adaptive course. What takes a lot longer for us is actually building it out into the system and then doing the quality and assurance checks. So for our institution, we have a 12-week design for a regular course, and I'm looking at about a 15-week design for a Realizeit course. Again, we're relatively new to this, so I'm hoping that it will go faster. I know that we've done, or I've heard that folks have done courses in as quickly as 3 or 4 weeks, depending on kind of where they're at. But we're very committee-driven here too. So our courses are created in our curriculum committees, and they're faculty-driven. So ours take a little bit longer too, in that we have voting on content and voting on assessment and voting processes that go a little bit longer. So it would absolutely be a quicker process if you didn't have kind of those voting pieces in place.
Okay, and I know that you're pretty early in your journey with adaptive, but if you had to pick one thing that's been the most delightful surprise and maybe one thing that's been the most painful during the process, what would those things be?
So the delightful to me is how how the design works. I really like the chunking design, and I feel like this system is very user-friendly. For us, the challenge is content. So we as an institution are trying to get away from the textbook model and are using the open educational resources. And so that's something that is a little bit more challenging because of the way that we're using the resources. But if we wanted to use a textbook, that is something that has definitely caused some trouble, just because we need permissions from publishers and then working on ingesting the content. So using the system, I absolutely love that idea of the design and the way that it's delivered, but working with content is challenging, especially if you have content that has, publisher content. And I know that that's getting easier as we're building relationships with publishers, but when we first started this journey and we've asked publishers about using digital content, we haven't gotten that far. There are a lot of publishers who are still not sure of this process and have told us, no, we can't use their content in the Realizeit platform. And so I haven't revisited that recently because the current courses that we're working on are the open educational resources. But that's absolutely something that is challenging and can potentially cause your courses to be delayed as well, just getting approvals and that piece of it.
Okay, we're getting to the end of our questions, but to close things out, if you had one essential piece of advice to someone either just starting out with adaptive learning or considering starting adaptive learning, what would that be?
So what I would say is your team has some really great white label courses, and what I would recommend is going in there as both an instructor and as a student and just looking at some of the ideas that are there. I know I got it for math. Math is really easy for me. It made sense. But as soon as I was asked to start thinking about psychology and composition and other courses as an adaptive course, as soon as I got into some of the white label courses that Realizeit has and was checking out what's available and how someone else organized it, it made a lot more sense for us to then design courses and think about kind of adaptive design. And so checking out those kind of adaptive laid out courses was huge for me.
Great. We are through all of our questions. So at this point, we'll wrap things up. Annie, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. It's always great to hear how somebody else gets started and kind of pass the knowledge back and forth. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to visit us at realizeitlearning.com and reach out to us. We're happy to connect you with Annie or any of our other experts in our community who are doing this every day and have been on the front lines. So again, thank you everyone for attending, and Annie, especially thank you to you. Have a wonderful day, everyone.